Welcome to Heart Space Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Anna.
And I'm Candice. This is a podcast dedicated to all things heart-centered. In each episode, we will open our heart space to share embodied experiences, simple tips, and thoughtful prompts for you to live a heart-centered life.
If you are curious about the wisdom of our hearts, if you are ready to embrace deep transformation, this podcast is for you.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any episodes.
From our hearts to yours, Anna and Candice.
Hi everyone. Happy New Year 2024. We are wishing you all a year filled with heartwarming moments. Today we are happy to bring you our second guest episode, and joining us in the Heartspace podcast is the incredible Leigh. Leigh is a yoga teacher. She's also a storyteller with a gift for weaving wisdom into her words, and you will see what I mean. She's curating soul-nourishing retreats, and she owns Meghalaya Shala, a boutique yoga studio here in Singapore. In this episode, we are delving into the realms of yoga and spirituality, exploring the essence of living yoga. We will talk about intuition, the inner feminine, Ayurveda, and so much more. Leigh is generously sharing pockets of wisdom that can inspire anyone on a journey towards a heart-centered life. Throughout this episode, you will hear the name Prasad mentioned a couple of times, so just for context, he's our teacher. Now, before we dive into this enriching conversation, we have something special to share. We would like to invite you to our first community gathering of 2024. It's an online workshop called Radical Pause, which will take place on January 27th. This workshop taps into the energy of winter, that slow down period many of us experience right about now. Winter carries a unique energy. It teaches us patience, giving us an opportunity to reconnect with our inner selves and fully embrace the wisdom of an intentional pause. So, if you are ready for a winter's journey to reconnect with self, join us for a radical pause. Throughout this online gathering, we will carve out a space for mindful movements, meditation, letting go ritual, winter journaling, and a sharing circle. That will be January 27th, Saturday at 4 p.m. Singapore time. Everyone is invited, and I will see you online. All right, that's all. Now let's dive into the heart of it all with our today's guest, Leigh. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode. Today we are welcoming Leigh to Heart Space podcast. And we are here, Leigh, Candice, and myself, at a recording studio today again. And let's get to it. Let's introduce Leigh and jump to today's episode.
Okay. Leigh found yoga 16 years ago in a tiny studio in Chinatown. As much as she enjoyed the dance-like flow of postures, it was the meditation practice after the asana sessions that really drew her in. Leigh has been teaching since 2013 and over the years learned to understand and, more importantly, respect anatomical differences. Because of that, she believes in creating safe spaces that empower practitioners to step into their intuitive wisdom and practice according to their inner alignment. Leigh's classes are embodied, intuitive, and poetic, and a reflection of her life on and off the mat. She sees life to be the greatest teacher, with every moment serving as an opportunity to connect to our higher self and to live with intention, compassion, and integrity. Apart from teaching yoga, Leigh runs Living Yoga, where she curates retreats that combine her love for travel with her sincere desire to hold space for journeys of introspection, healing, and transformation. Leigh now spends her days teaching yoga, running retreats, and managing her latest venture, Meghalaya Shala, a cozy shala in Singapore that brings light to the teachings of yoga in ways that are accessible, holistic, and empowering. Welcome, Leigh.
Thank you. It's a little surreal to be hearing about myself like that. I'm like, did I write some of those?
You wrote every word. And it's also an honor for me to be reading this and also nodding my head with every word that you mentioned in this introduction. Yeah.
You have been part of the journey, especially
Yes.
since you did the teacher training.
Yeah, so I did the training, I went for a retreat, and also went to her Meghalaya Shala a few
You guys
times.
taught here as well.
We
at
did,
the
we
Shala,
collaborated. Yeah, so I feel like I am part of your life as well as observing your life and how it grew from the time that we met during the TT and up to now today. And for Anna, it's also an interesting perspective where you're seeing Leigh as from a different angle, I guess, a different lens.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm very excited for the episode today. We have a lot of questions to you. But first of all, how are you doing today?
I am well. I'm in a busy part in my chapter, I think. But I like being busy. Sometimes it's overwhelming, but I thrive when it's overwhelming. So I'm in a good space, I think.
Okay, that's great. So your project is called Living Yoga, where you're organizing retreats. And also on your website, Candice found a sentence: every moment in life is yoga. To practice is to live. Can you share a little bit more? What is it like to be living yoga?
I think quite early on in my yoga journey as a practitioner and later on as a teacher, it became very clear that yoga doesn't begin when you step into the studio or onto your mat, and yoga doesn't end the moment you leave your mat or the studio. In fact, what we do on the mat, what we call practice, so to speak, is really a refinement of how we show up in our life moment to moment. For example, if I arrive on my mat and I realize, whoa, I'm actually really impatient or frustrated with myself today, and then I step off my mat, I have a shower, or I grab my bag and I leave the studio, that practice itself becomes potentially a mirror for me to be like, okay, I realize now that I am a certain way. For the rest of the day or the rest of the evening, is there any opportunity for me to sort of shift perspective or shift gears so I am maybe less frustrated, and hopefully my frustration doesn't spill over to the people in my life or the community in my life?
Yeah, that is so important. I love what you said. Seeing your practice as a mirror. And I see it that way also for myself in my own practice. And yeah, it's a beautiful learning also to be diving into these experiences and reflecting on our journey through the practice that we
And the beauty is that the practice evolves as we evolve as people. And as we evolve as people, our practice also evolves. So there's always this synergy and this alchemy, I feel, between life and yoga. And after a while, it's really hard to draw the line between what is yoga and what is life. And I think that really brings me to my answer to your question. There's really no separation at the end.
Yeah, I think living yoga is very fitting for you. Almost like you're an ambassador of what does it mean to be living off the mat. And we see that, and for you, like, yoga is a mirror, and for people on the outside observing, it's also your expression of yoga as a mirror for us to reflect, oh, what does yoga mean to me? So very, very inspiring. And I think that also is something that is fully embodied. It's not something that you force it out at all. And like you said, every moment in life is yoga. So just appreciating the highs and the lows, the good and the bad, and how yoga can come into our life to help us to also realize that we are more than that.
It's true. And I feel like, I think Prasad, he has spoken a lot about that as well. Maybe the idea that people may sometimes have of yoga, or what I feel could be a misconception, is that it's a beautiful practice. It's feel good and beautiful in the sense that aesthetically it's beautiful. But I find that practicing yoga can sometimes be so confronting and so challenging. And when we look at our life as yoga, I mean, life is not simple as like, what do I choose to eat for lunch? Sometimes when you're caught between a rock and a hard place, to make a choice, that is where your practice really shines through. And that is where maybe the ego wants to make decision A, but the practice is there as the wise mind saying like, hey, wait a minute, why don't you think about it or sit on it a little bit longer? And these processes, these rites of fire that we have to go through and initiate ourselves into, they're not beautiful processes. They leave you vulnerable. And that mirror, the mirror can shine when you're looking really pretty one day, but the mirror is also there when you wake up one day and there are like 5 pimples on your face, right? So I feel like it's really important that as practitioners, especially as yoga teachers, that we allow the not so pretty, not so smooth side of the practice to be expressed, whether we express it on Instagram or newsletters or whatever, but to not give the misconception that once you practice yoga, everything will be beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. That resonates a lot. Can you share with us a little bit more about your journey with yoga, starting this 16 years ago in a tiny studio in Chinatown up till now, and maybe how your relationship with yoga has been evolving?
Yeah. So the first time I practiced yoga was actually way before 16 years. I was 15 years old, I remember, or 16. It's in a studio called Amore Fitness. I think it's still around. It's like an all-women studio. A secondary school friend of mine, she said, I can bring a friend in for free. Why don't you come with me to yoga and we'll go do our nails after? So I said, sure, I'll come. And I had absolutely no idea what yoga was. I was just following the instructor, and they have like a stage so you can see her really clearly. And at some point, she came to me and we were in something like maybe a bridge pose or something. And she used a finger to sort of like push my butt cheek up. I'm assuming what she was trying to say is like lift your hips up, right? And that was the moment where I'm like, whoa, this practice is so intrusive. I'm never coming back. Yeah, and I never expected that yoga would be a thing for me, because in the later years, like the early mid to late teens, I was a little bit of a gym bunny. I love going to the gym. I love running. I love swimming. Yoga, in contrast, is a lot less active and a lot less dynamic. And I just left it at that one yoga experience. That was it. And then when I was maybe 20, almost 21, my family was going through a rough patch. I was going through a rough patch with my then boyfriend. We were about to break up. He was about to move away to study. And life suddenly felt so challenging. And I feel like it's when life is challenging that we are presented with a choice to keep going the way we have always known life to be, or to look for alternate perspectives. And I happened to be walking through Keongside Road at that time. There was a studio called Whatever Yoga Studio. No such thing as Instagram or Facebook at that time. They literally had a piece of paper saying yoga classes, and then they had like the telephone number, which they cut into strips, and then you peel one off. So I tore one off. I took it home, and then I asked one of my really good girlfriends at that time, Cece, who Candice met in India last year.
Cece joined you for yoga.
We went to that first class together, and I'm like, hey, you want to try yoga? And she's like, what's that? I'm like, I don't know, but shall we go? So we went, and we had no idea what style of yoga it was. There was no such thing as Lululemon at that time. We went in fisherman pants that we got from one of our trips to Thailand. We walked in, and there were 2 teachers. One was, I assume, the owner, and then another Indian man who ended up being, I would say, my first yoga teacher, Sunil Dahia. And they looked at us in our fisherman pants, and they're like, girls, have you done yoga before? We're like, nah, not really. They're like, okay, good, we'll try. So that was my first yoga class. And I remember aching for a week after that first practice. It was an Ashtanga sequence. But something about it drew me back. It was chaotic. I felt like a fish out of water. Hardly knew anything they were doing. And at some point, our pants were falling down. But there was something in it, something that drew me back, and Cece as well, So every Wednesday we went. So I call it Wednesdays at Whatever. And it was a small group of us, maybe about 6 or 8. I remember there was a couple. At some point, they brought their daughter into the practice as well. And everybody arrived with no expectations, because at that time, I don't think we were as informed about yoga and shapes and variations of yoga that we have access to now as information. And I think that was part of the beauty. You arrive fully receptive as a student for your teacher to introduce and initiate you into that day's practice. Yeah. And the months that I spent Wednesdays there, they were beautiful. And I expected, shortly after I went to India for an exchange program, and I thought, okay, I'm going to India, the birthplace of yoga. I'm sure I can find a yoga teacher. No, I didn't find a yoga teacher. I didn't practice yoga much, except on my own for 6 months. And when I came back, whatever had ceased operations.
Oh.
They were very much ahead of that time. That's what I like to say. Like they had a vegan cafe, they had like tarot decks, they had like a healing room, things that if they had opened 10 years later, they would have totally thrived. But
For sure.
yeah, at that time, I think many people didn't really understand what they stood for.
Yeah.
So the studio closed down. I searched for a bit to find a studio that offered me that same sense. At that time, I had no words or no vocabulary to articulate what it is I'm looking for. But in retrospect, like thinking about it now, I feel that I was looking for that sense of safety and community. And I tried out a couple of studios at that time. There weren't a lot in Singapore, not a lot in the Chinatown region where my family was living. I didn't find a place that gave me that sense of feeling. And I just practiced yoga on my own on VCDs. I'll play it. I liked one by Rodney Yee. He's an American yoga teacher. So that became my practice for many years, just doing it at home. Until one day, my best friend, that was maybe 2010, 2011, she, as part of her work gang, they found a hot yoga studio. She really liked it. And she said, hey, bestie, you've always wanted to find a yoga studio. Let me gift you a trial for a week at this place that I really like. It was home yoga. So I went, I walked in, I did my first class, and there was something about the intensity and the sweat and the dynamism that really spoke to me at that time in my life. And I never looked back. So that was my journey back into practice. I feel like I'm going to go on and on and on if I continue about my journey. So maybe I stop here and then you can ask me more questions.
Oh, I think we can just hear it on and on and on because it sounds like a very trusting journey as well for you to just surrender into this practice, not knowing what to receive out of it. And like you said, it's one of the best thing, right? Because when we all enter into a class and we don't have any expectations of what a class should be, and right now in this day and age with social media, all of us want to look a certain way. But back then, the innocence of it, I think, brings out the joy in the experience of the practice.
Yeah, I really like how that sounds. Innocence. There was no expectation and also no assumption, I feel. One day, I remember midway through the class, my teacher started to bring in chairs. And all of us were like, what are we doing with those chairs? It ended up being like Iyengar style headstands.
Wow.
And at that time, you go to yoga wearing like track pants and like I wore like big t-shirts. And I remember when it was my turn to invert, Cece came up and she wanted to tuck my t-shirt into my pants. And my teacher took offense. He said, I'm not going to look there, you know. Yeah.
So
that's
cute.
a funny memory that popped up.
Yeah. So then you tried multiple asana styles. Would you say that? Like starting from from Ashtanga to Iyengar and then
I'm not sure what he thought.
Okay.
I don't think it was Iyengar. I don't even think it was Ashtanga.
Was
It's something that he
likes.
Gestalt yoga. I tried Googling it, reading up on it, nothing. So I feel like it could have been his own system. It was dynamic, but at the end there was always Yoga Nidra, which I didn't know was Yoga Nidra at that time.
So the practice took about 90 minutes.
90 minutes, but we often practice for 2 hours.
Wow. Sounds like a very full practice.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And I think that was what so practicing at home at that time, it was a wonderful studio, a lot of hot yoga classes because that was the trend in Singapore then. But I remember after practicing for half a year, like really steadily, I was there maybe 4 or 5 days a week. I went up to one of my favorite teachers and I always felt to her, yoga was something more than the postures we did on the mat as well. And I asked her, my package is expiring And I'm hoping to find a studio in which yoga could be a bit more spiritual. Is there anywhere you would recommend? And she really racked her brains, and she came back to me really apologetic, and she said, actually, I don't know. I'm not sure there's a space like that in Singapore. So I continued practicing at home. It was still a wonderful journey. But I think I really found my spiritual or richness of expression of yoga when I started going to Bali, practicing in Bali, especially in Ubud, and eventually doing my teacher training there.
Yeah.
So that was like the next chapter of my journey with yoga.
We're also very gently nudging us to the next question of how did you start to sow the seed of intention of wanting to be a teacher? And who are your mentors or teachers during this journey and up to now?
I remember at home, at some point, there was a guest teacher, Asami Martins. She's Japanese, but she was based in Australia. So she came in for a guest teaching stint. And there was something so raw, and her willingness to be vulnerable really spoke to me. In a hot yoga studio, you can imagine a lot of people's idea of a good practice is one that makes you burn the most calories or makes you sweat the most, feeling like you burnt the most calories, maybe. And I remember she shared a story about why are we so obsessed with calorie tracking, which I felt was not something quite ballsy to say in a studio where most people's intention is about this. And we struck up a beautiful friendship. At some point, I came up to her in the locker room after one of her classes, and I said, I think I want to do a teacher training. To which she said, you should go for it. And I think that was when I was a journalist at that time, and that was when I began to take that seat a little more seriously. I really enjoyed what I was doing in journalism. I didn't leave because it was a shitty job. I really enjoyed what I do. I was a food and travel journalist, so I was eating a lot, traveling a lot, which at that point in my life was a great thing, right? But it started to make me wonder what is the meaning in life if all I was doing was to tell people to go to pretty places or to spend their next paycheck on a $500 dinner at the city's hottest restaurant. And I had made editor by then, and I was starting to see a little bit more behind the scenes of what it is like to be a journalist in Singapore, the relationship between advertisers and publishers. And it really felt at that time that I was done with that chapter in my life. But I felt like I was done a lot earlier than I had planned. I wanted to leave at a certain time and do my teacher training, but towards the end of my stint, as much as I loved the job and I recognized that I loved the job, some nights I was just crying because the alignment was completely off by then. And I remember searching. I knew I wanted to do my training in Bali. I looked and looked. There's a website called balispirit.com, which was the only website then. And I searched and searched. Nothing came up, like some I'll look at it. The curriculum didn't look right. And then one day, even though I'd just been on the site the day before, Leigh Khoo's training came up. Never met her, saw her face, felt like she would be nice. And she was going to teach an Anusara-inspired training with mythology, pranayama, everything that I was so hungry for in Singapore. And even though I'd never met her, I was like, this is the one. And I attended the training, I think a good 6 months before I was ready to quit my job. But I quit anyway.
And after that, did you decide immediately that you wanted to teach, or like after quitting your job, you spent a good time traveling or anything like that before?
Actually, something happened. So when I resigned, a couple of weeks later, my dad actually got a stroke. And my managing editor came up to me and he said, look, why don't you stay? Maybe it seems like at this time in your life, you would need more stability. And at that point, I didn't even blink. I just said, no, I have to go. And he said, why? Like, why are you so adamant? A training can happen anytime. Wouldn't you want to be here for your family? And I said, I do, and I will. But I felt at that time that if I don't leave journalism, I might stay on for 10, 20 years. And then what would become of me? You know, I would be stuck in a pattern that I'll find it harder to sort of break out of.
Yeah.
So I went for the training. And midway through the training, I just knew that I wanted to teach. How, where, what, no idea, but I just knew. So I came back to Singapore. I started to do my own pop-up classes. I rented a space, pay as you wish. I started that way. At the time, I was also still editing and writing on the side. So that gave me a little bit of money because, as many would know, yoga teachers don't earn a lot of money, especially when you're a young and fresh yoga teacher. And I wish I could have traveled, but when I came home to Singapore, I only had $17 in my bank account. Can't travel.
Okay, yeah. So Bali was a huge investment for you back then.
Huge, because it wasn't just the training. The training was in USD.
Yeah.
Accommodation, food, flights, all of that.
Wow, it sounds like it's really taking a leap of faith that this is it for you.
In retrospect, it was, but at that time, I didn't even pause. It just felt right. And maybe when I was at that age, 25, 26, I didn't think so much about consequences or responsibilities. It was easier, I think, to just go with the flow.
Yeah. Were there any other, so you mentioned Emily, any other mentors or teachers that shaped you as a teacher?
So Emily was and still is a huge part of my inspiration. Not so much in the technicalities of teaching, but in the way she shows up to life. She's vulnerable, she's brave, she's courageous, and when the situation calls for it, she's a badass. And I realize a lot of things I realize in retrospect, but I realize that studying with her and just going back to be in her presence again and again keeps me on my track to be accountable to myself. So I would say she's definitely a huge influence. Somebody who really initiated me into classical Hatha yoga would be Octavio Salvado. I don't feel like we have a very deep or strong connection as teacher and student, but at a particular point in my life where I really needed the richness and the rigidity of classical tradition, he was there. I did a mentorship with him for a couple of months. And I really changed the direction of my practice, I think. My perspective of the practice, my approach to the practice. And because of him, I then was a lot more interested in the Krishnamacharya tradition of yoga. And that led me to find and seek out Nitya Mohan. Her father, A.G. Mohan, is a direct disciple of Krishnamacharya. So at some point towards the later years of my practice, I really went old school. So I would say at this point in my life, I would say Emily Khoo, Nitya, but at some point Octavio played a really important role.
Would you consider any of them to be your guru? Or I wouldn't say teacher, but someone who really inspires you and influences you in a way that is beyond just passing down knowledge to you?
That's something that I struggle with because in the earlier part of my years as a seeker, I felt like I was so desperate and so invested to find a guru. And I would be envious of people who are like, oh, my guru says this, so I do this. Or my guru says I shouldn't eat this, so I don't eat it. And I was so hungry for that direction from this guru of mine that was nowhere to be found. And to answer your question, I would say, no, I don't look at any of them as my guru, but I look at them as my teachers. And while guru and teacher is used interchangeably in the world right now, I feel like it's very, very different.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I don't feel that I have fully devoted my life to any of them. And because of that, I can't say that he or she is my guru.
So, a lesser known fact to most people is that you love Ayurveda as well, and that you weave these two sciences together. So, can you share with us a little bit more how did that begin?
Unofficially, I think it began when I was a young child. I was very sickly. I always had fevers. I was always coughing. And Western medicine never worked on me. Even like, I think at that time, when I was in my childhood, at some point, if you're always having high fevers, the Western way was to immerse you into like a bath full of ice. And that was very shocking to my system, and it did nothing to bring my fevers down. So my mother turned towards TCM, and for a period of time it worked. Like whenever I was sick, going to the TCM, a particular doctor in Ang Mo Kio, her medicine would be able to bring my fevers down. But then I started to get like really bad coughs, like childhood asthma almost. And I would spend all night coughing, and the entire family would be up with me, and nobody could alleviate my suffering. My father, he was working at the Registry of Marriages at that time, so he was a civil servant, and he had a lot of Indian friends, or friends who were into like Indian tradition. So he had friends who were palm readers, friends who read faces, who read fortunes and all of that. And somehow somebody told him that there's a medicine man, this monk from Chennai, visiting Singapore. He's here to raise awareness about his temple, but also to raise like donations. So why don't you bring your daughter to him? So I remember the monk was staying at probably his friend's house, so somewhere in Thomson or Ang Mo Kio. My father, my aunt, my mother, we went together, and we were in, I would guess, what was a puja room. I remember he laying me down on my back, everybody was around. I don't remember much, but my mom always insists that he did something with his hands, and out of his hands he fashioned some holy ash. So I was given that ash to drink, and for 81 days I had to draw like particular yantras, which I didn't know. I was 9 years old really, and it was really a chore more than anything. But I had to drink that, I had to write that, and at the end of 81 days, my cough was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So is it Ayurveda per se? Maybe not the orthodox way, but there was something in there that was definitely more holistic and spiritual than Western medicine. And I think that was my initiation into energetic healing, if I can say. And I don't know, but that childhood experience has been very deeply etched in my mind and my memory. And now that you ask me, like, I'm actually trying to figure out in my memory, when did I actually really receive Ayurveda in my life? I don't know, but it could be fully. Several years ago, I attended a pranayama workshop, and I was at that part of my practice where I was very zealous. I felt like, if you want to do something, you have to spend 3 hours a day doing it. So I went to a pranayama workshop. It was taught by a scholar from India. And in the workshop, he taught all sorts of kumbhaka techniques. Retention of breath at the bottom of your exhale, retention of breath at the top of your inhale. You retain your breath for this particular breath ratio. And I felt that since I paid so much money going for the workshop, the least I could do was practice. So I practiced every day, thinking that I was a very good student. I started to feel sick. I started to feel nauseous. I started to feel like I had very variable digestive capacity. Sometimes I was hungry, but the moment I started eating, I felt nauseous. And I was like, am I pregnant? I checked. I wasn't. But I didn't feel like it was anything that required me going to a Western doctor. Somehow.
And you wouldn't be able to explain much to them.
Yeah,
even if you were
like
to go.
nausea, they'll be, okay, do a pregnancy test maybe. They will send me for a scope or
For
I don't
some
know.
tests.
Correct. But
that
I
wouldn't show anything.
I didn't think that was the. I didn't even consider that as a healing route. Somehow I found my way to an Ayurvedic clinic that was in Bedok at that time. I went in. The sweet doctor, he took my pulse and then he looked at me, like he put down his glasses. He looked at me and he said, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I teach yoga." "You teach yoga? So why is your energy like that?" And I'm like, "What's going on?" And he said, "Your vata is really out of whack." So what I didn't know then was me thinking that I was such a good student doing those kumbhakas and retention that was actually throwing my vata way out of the window. So as part of his prescription, apart from like the kashyams, the, what do you call it? The liquid herbs and the pills and the powders, he said, you need to stop practicing yoga for 3 weeks. The only thing you can do is to sit. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? He said, no, I'm not kidding. I said, okay. And you need to stop eating meat. And I'm like, really? He's like, yep. So I said, okay, I'll try. So the first 3 days were a bit of a struggle because I felt hungry all the time. You know, it's like you're nauseous, but when somebody tells you you can't eat, you're like, nope, I'm hungry. Like that slice of vegetable is not going to fill my stomach. But you know what? In 3 days, a veggie diet, and I was, okay, I think I must have felt really bad because I was really invested in wanting to feel better. So I was cooking things like buckwheat noodles in konbu broth and just like green vegetables, which until now I don't find appetizing. But I ate that. My only treat that I snuck in was like a Kit Kat bar, I remember. After 3 days of eating like that and his medicine, I felt fine. And I continued. I kept it up for 3 weeks. I went back to him and I said, okay, can I stop this and can I eat meat now? And he's like, nope, continue for another 3 weeks. Well, 3 weeks became a long time and I stopped eating meat since then.
I see.
Because I realized, oh, the bloating after meal is not normal. I can actually navigate not being uncomfortable after eating just by being more careful about what I ate. So, very long story, but maybe that was my full initiation into Ayurveda.
Yeah. And I know that you're also bringing yoga and Ayurveda together in, I remember that you were offering some workshops before. And for me personally also, yoga and Ayurveda together and weaving them with in your classes or with clients. This is a very important venture for me as well. And as much as each of these sciences by themselves, they are beautiful and they can work separate, bringing them together is just another level. It's something that brings so much depth to our yoga practice, bringing Ayurvedic knowledge into our yoga practice and yoga into our Ayurvedic lifestyle. How is it for you in your life? Do you follow these Ayurvedic recommendations in your life, in your yoga practice, and also professionally with your students?
100% agree with what you were saying, like yoga and Ayurveda being wonderful modalities on their own, but when we weave them together, it sort of like powers up the entire approach to health as well as spiritual growth, I would say. I had tea with a little sidetrack, but I had tea with a teacher a couple of days ago, a teacher friend, and he said, you know, people keep saying yoga is for health. Not really. Yoga is for enlightenment. He said that, you know, it is a practice for enlightenment, and to teach it any less than such is not doing justice to this ancient system. And I feel, to add on to what you said, I feel that Ayurveda is for health. And it's what supports you to be healthy in order to pursue yoga for enlightenment. But even when I was younger as a practitioner and a teacher, I didn't know that. So now that I know, it is my duty to share, right? So for me, yoga and Ayurveda, they are not really separate, the way like yoga and life are not separate, because with the elements continually changing, like right now when it's super rainy, when there's so much kapha, a little bit of vata in the external environment, many of us experiencing it in our internal environment as well. Like right now, I'm like always waiting for the right moment to clear my throat because I have so much phlegm and congestion. So I feel like in my life, I practice a lot of Ayurvedic nuggets when I am aware of how my energy is, how my health is at any given time. And I would never blink twice at going to my Ayurvedic doctor and getting herbs. I don't like to self-medicate and I don't like to self-supplement. And even though I'm a Ayurvedic health counselor, I don't feel very called in the direction of supplementing, telling people to supplement, or self-supplementing in that sense. So I don't blink twice about going to him and getting like herbs, kashayams, pills whenever I feel like it's an imbalance that I cannot rectify myself. But if it's like, okay, I've been eating cereal with milk for 3 mornings because I'm in a rush, and I start to realize that I'm waking up with congestion in my throat or in my nose, then I'll just rectify it by eating like a warmer breakfast or being careful about not eating too much dairy or sweets or anything that's too rich. So that to me is my Ayurvedic lifestyle. Living in Singapore and running a studio and running a business, I find it hard to practice like a very, very Ayurvedic dinacharya where I wake up at 4 a.m., I go to sleep by 10 p.m. I wish I could, but I don't.
I think when you were just talking about how Ayurveda is for health and yoga is a path of self-actualization, I just feel like standing up and doing like a applause and doing a standing
We should turn the
ovation.
camera to you.
Like, yes, say it louder for the people at the back. We just need to normalize that and not think like yoga is just the asana postures, it's just about fitness, and leaving it as a very simple relationship. Yeah.
But I think enlightenment is a big and confronting word for many people. And I mean, at the end of it, you know, whether you're working for a studio or you're teaching yoga or Ayurveda or offering it in your own capacity, it is still business. And I think there is a part of us that wants the business to be palatable to people. But I feel like it's also then where we negotiate and navigate our own sense of comfort. I mean, we don't need to go around with like a big cardboard that says yoga is enlightenment, yoga is
Maybe
moksha.
we could.
We could.
Wear a shirt.
We'll print it for next year. But I mean, we could.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, are we then going to alienate more
Yes.
people
Yeah.
than
Yeah, for
support
sure.
more people in the process? So I feel like it's a very fine line.
And I also feel that sometimes we need time to accept these things. For some of us, there is a certain stage in our life that we just need the asana practice,
Yeah.
and that's it. And that's just the path that each of us is walking by ourselves, and there is no rush,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I believe that for all three of us, it took us many years to even come to a place of understanding a little bit of what the knowledge of Ayurveda is really trying to tell us, and just being more in alignment with nature, listening to your body. That itself already is the beginning of living an Ayurvedic lifestyle.
I also like one of my favorite books about yoga. It's written by David Life and Sharon Gannon. It's called Jivamukti Yoga. I found it at a point in my journey where I was really thirsty for spirituality. I hadn't done my teacher training then, but I remember in one of the pages, you know, she or he wrote that if you are drawn to yoga in this lifetime, chances are you are picking up from your previous lifetimes. So I think we often think of life as this life as we know it in this body, but I definitely agree with past lives. And, you know, it's also being comfortable ourselves with what is enlightenment to us. And at what point am I willing to give up what in pursuit of this sense of enlightenment? And I feel like maybe we don't get there in this life. There'll be many more lifetimes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the beauty of life, I think. We can always start again and again. Or not again, not like back to square one, but it's a continuous journey.
Continuous
and every
path, yeah.
lifetime. There's a poem that you shared. Like, I am a version of many lifetimes of different women, something like that.
Yeah.
I
Like
think
The 1,000 Women,
Yeah.
something by Emery Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are an accumulation of many lifetimes of experiencing life, and we shouldn't be too harsh on ourselves also.
Yeah.
Based on your own experience as a teacher, do you feel like yoga and Ayurveda is more receptive now in this day and age? And how did that create the offerings that you have right now for you? Is it because of the feedback that you receive from all these little projects that you have done in the past, and now that you have come to a place where you have decided that you're going full into this path of sharing the kind of yoga that you personally embody and the kind of Ayurveda that you also embody?
That's a big question. I remember that I first shared about Ayurveda in relation to practicing yoga a year after that Ayurvedic doctor supported me in my healing. I think that was when I realized that, whoa, Ayurveda is so much and it has so much potential. And I started to share, like, okay, how do we practice it in our diets and how do we practice it on the yoga mat? You know, a vata pacifying practice is very different from a kapha pacifying one, for example. So I felt like the response from that first sharing, that was maybe 2017, 2018, it was pretty well received, even though many people came and they're like, actually, we don't know what Ayurveda is, but we're open to learning. And I think the mini projects along the way affirmed me that there is value in weaving Ayurveda into yoga, or at least sharing the knowledge of Ayurveda in a yoga setting. And my work was very much in a yoga setting and still is in a yoga setting, that I just incorporated it into my teacher training curriculum from 2019. And to see eyes light up when people look at dosha, constitution, or just Ayurveda as a framework that offers them that reflection to understand themselves better, that is the best feedback I think I can get. Yeah.
I think personally that was also one of the reasons why I joined your TT after listening to a podcast and not knowing much about you as well. I think the way that you approached Leigh Khoo sir was also the way that I approached the teacher training that you had, because I was looking for a teacher who understood Ayurveda and then creating a safe space for me to get to know yoga better. So it's very rare for me, with the very limited research that I have done, to have found a teacher that does that in a very holistic way.
I'm glad we found each other. But it's also interesting because from a less yoga setting perspective, you were already interested in Ayurveda.
Yes, yeah.
So there must have been some resurgence of that ancient knowledge at that time, perhaps.
Yeah, for me it was a interesting lens as to how I can use Ayurveda to then tap into the world of yoga, because I never really understood what yoga is, or just mainly asana practice, and I really wanted to blend both of it together, and I think that was the great opportunity for me to just come together and just feel and see how that creative process was done. So it's an honor to be in the training.
It was great to have you.
And slightly changing the gears, you've led numerous yoga teacher trainings, right? And you guided many people through the world of yoga. And on your social media, I found a post where you've mentioned that this role feels like a form of motherhood for you at this stage of your life. How has embracing this sense of motherhood have been treating you?
Bittersweet. I feel like, so at the start of teacher trainings, I often tell my trainees, I don't know if I must have, I say, the moment you step into the doors of the teacher training Kula, you are not just my students, and I definitely don't see students as clients. You're not just my students, you are my children. And for the next few months that we journey together, I'm going to hold the space like a mother, in the sense that, I have attended trainings myself and I know how taxing, how intense, but how vulnerable those sessions can be. And like a mother, I would do my best to soothe you and hold that space safe for you to experience whatever is unraveling in your life. But like a parent, like a mother, it is also my responsibility to educate you, because you're going to step out as yoga teachers, and you're going to be, if you choose to, educating other people about yoga. So like a parent, it is also my duty to tell you this is what yoga is to the best of my knowledge and capacity. So it's bittersweet in the sense that I have to discipline them sometimes. So I do scold on my trainings. People who come on retreats, who have done trainings with me, they say, why are you so relaxed on retreats? I'm like, what do you think? Of course I'm relaxed on retreats. So there's that disciplinarian part of me, but also that nurturing, loving part of me. And when they graduate and trainees fly the coop, so to speak, I look at them and their journeys unravel. Like a couple of weeks ago, we had a gathering, Candace and quite a few girls from her training kula. And just to see like, wow, in a span of 2 years, how people's lives are shifting and continue to shift. Just watching it from that space of like, these are my babies and they've grown up and they're still growing up. It was very, very sweet and fulfilling for me. But, just because people do my trainings doesn't mean that 5 years down the road, they align with the same teachings, and that's okay. But it makes me a little bit sad when people stop practicing. I wish I could not feel that way, but it makes me sad when I see that suddenly, from yoga being such an important part of your life that you're inspired to do a teacher training, and whether you teach or not, it doesn't matter, but somehow your relationship with yoga has fallen apart. To hear that or to see that or to know about that, it makes me sad.
And as a mother still, you would be observing and just allowing that process to be happening for them, for themselves.
Of course. I also feel like, as much as we in the yoga world believe that yoga is the best way, not many people may align with yoga as a path of practice. Yoga as asana, yoga as exercise, as health, maybe. But yoga as a path of practice may not be palatable to all people. Or some people may be drawn into it enough to pursue a training or to deepen their studies, but then realize that actually, you know what? It's not really for me. And it's fair game, right? It's fair trial. Just that because I love yoga so much, I feel like, such a waste. But I will never tell you that. But then again, when they hear the podcast, if you're not practicing, I'm probably talking about you. This is the teacher Leigh coming out.
And what led you into creating retreats? Was it while you were still teaching and then retreat happened because you felt like you needed a space where you could bring students out of the studio and be in somewhere to be fully immersed in yoga? How did that all happen for you?
The motivation for me putting together my first yoga retreat was because I wanted to share my Bali with people. That was in 2015. And at that time, like now everybody knows what the yoga barn is. But at that time, if you ask 10 people, maybe one will say, oh, the yoga barn. And in those days, the yoga barn is not this huge, sprawling, like complex that it is. When I started practicing there literally was that main shala that was the reception. And just like the hall upstairs, nothing else. But now there are like so many studios, guest houses. They have the Ayurvedic arm where they offer therapeutic sessions. So it started from there because I feel like if I am so hungry for the spirituality that is yoga, I'm sure there are people who are as hungry as I am. But maybe they're not so lucky to have had the experience to find all these things, whether it's the yoga barn, whether it's healers, whether at that time it was like raw food, like little workshops and all of that. I wanted to share. And that was what led me to curating my first retreat with home yoga at that time, because I was a full-time teacher. But 3 weeks before the retreat was meant to launch, my venue partner called me, and I was in Melbourne at that time. He called me and he said, hey, you can't come.
And I said, what do you mean I can't come? 20 people had signed up for retreat. I have their money in my hands. What do you mean I can't come? He's like, immigration is on to us. So at that time, what I didn't know was how tricky it was to run a retreat in Bali, because you enter on a tourist visa, but you're kind of there for business. But at the same time, you're not making money in Bali, you know?
Yes.
You're like a tour operator of sorts.
Yeah.
But I think they had just shifted governments at that time. And I called Emily, another teacher friend of mine was in Bali, and she said, yeah, I had to halt my training for 2 days because immigration literally was sitting outside the Shala waiting for me to do something. Just so they could like call her in for questioning. But she was too smart to sort of fall into that trap. So I had to cancel the training. I had to cancel the retreat, offer them refunds, or say that if you want, I would still go to Bali and you're still welcome to come with me. You can experience all the guest sessions that I have already planned, like Tibetan bowl meditation, which, you know, now it's so popular, but at that time, it was only in certain places in the world. And I said, and I can't teach the classes, but I can arrange for the retreat to call in a local teacher. And I will also bring you to the yoga barn where Emily was kind enough to teach a session for me. So it started with that very naive desire to share my Bali with people. But then that fell through, right? And I was very, very traumatized for a few years. You know, like, oh, no more retreats, man. I'm just going to teach yoga. But in 2018, shortly after losing my aunt in November 2017, today is her birthday, actually. I felt like, you know, I took time off from the studio. And when you're moving through a period of being a caretaker and a period of grief, your practice changes, whether you know it or you want it. And my way of wanting to interact with my community also shifted. And I remember having coffee with Mel, the owner of Home at that time. She still is the owner of Home. And I said, I think I want to do a retreat. What do you think? You know, we had a really bad run with Bali, but maybe we try Sri Lanka. And she said, go for it. And I said, okay, I'm in. So we were at a cafe, Punch, in North Canal. She left. And I was there. I took out my phone and I Googled yoga venues in Sri Lanka, right? Something came up. I clicked on it. I emailed the owner. It looked nice. It was a heritage home. He replied me in an hour. By that night, the retreat was done. At the prices, I knew exactly what we were going to do. And this is what, you know, before we started recording, it was those moments where life aligned that I felt completely supported. Have I been to Sri Lanka? Yes. Have I been to his retreat venue? No. Do I know him? No. But it felt right. And he turned out to be a really good friend who, we lost last year.
Wow. It sounds like you are always leaning into your intuition and also just receiving the support from the divine. Back then, were you already like in this space of, how should I put it, where you feel very connected with the divine or spirituality in that sense, where you could learn how to surrender and just listen for messages, for signs of where to go?
No, I don't think I had language to describe the divine at that time. I have never been a religious person. Growing up, my family is super open-minded as well. Like my father studied in St. Joseph's. Christian? Catholic? One of those? Catholic? Yeah. So he quotes the Bible. But he's not Christian, he's not Catholic. In fact, at some point in time, he followed Satya Sai Baba. My mom is very, I don't know what you call it, you know? Like, she's not Taoist, but she grew up in a kampong. Her mother was a bit of a shaman. So she has very sort of like Chinese shamanistic tendencies with a lot of superstitions, but also a lot of like folk cures, you know? Like if you have a headache, you take this egg, you do this and the headache will go, and it does. Yeah. You know, very like, I don't know what to call it. Yeah. And my sister is very spiritual. And when she started meditating, the entire family started meditating, except me. I was a little bit young at that time. So I feel like spirituality has always been a part of my life, but never religion.
Mm.
You know, like if you ask my father, what do you see? He'll say, free thinker. You know, my mom would say, why must I tell you? Because she's very, very rebellious. So even though I was sort of born into such a spiritual space, we were also not people who would like chant mantras or like, you know, go on temple pilgrimages or anything like that. We might go to the temple on Sundays, but that's about it. More for peace of mind than to pray to God. So I didn't have a language for the divine. Although now when you ask that question, it was very divinely guided. Yeah.
How does it feel for you when just thinking about that and sharing with us this sentence?
Divinely guided?
Yeah.
Things don't feel forced. Things fall into place. But oftentimes, I feel we are either too busy or distracted to witness this falling into place, that we take it for granted, or we are too stuck in our idea of how things should turn out that we bulldoze our way to things working out in the way that we expect them to. So there's a lot of ignorance, oblivion, or ego-driven actions, I feel, for all of us, you know? And I feel like I was able to allow all of that because I was grieving and I wasn't in full capacity and I didn't have access to my usual bulldozing ways. At that time.
So leaning into intuition for you, it's pretty natural at this point in your life.
Yeah. I felt like it's always been that way for me. Doing something that feels right always is the only way for me. Like, I was just talking to an old friend yesterday. I was explaining to him the idea of O levels and how before O levels we have something called preliminary examinations. I wasn't a very studious student at all. Not at all. But somehow I ended up doing really, really well in my O levels. Good enough to get into like the best junior college. But I knew from then that I don't want to go to junior college. I wanted to go to hospitality school. And that was Temasek Polytechnic at that time. And at that time, when you go to Polytechnic, the idea is that, oh, you must not have done well enough to get into junior college. That's why you're in Polytechnic. And I think that really affected my dad. He's like, your score is so good. Why don't you go to JC? Why are you telling me you want to go to Poly? You didn't speak to me for 3 months. He got his friend to call me from the office to try to like counsel me. But I think that was when I knew, like, if I want to do something, I'm going to do it. Like, I can't do something that doesn't feel aligned.
Yeah.
Even if it means fighting the world, fighting my father, I have to. And going to hotel school has been the best decision of my life. Yeah.
Interesting. So I understand that this is something that came to you also through your grief. Do you have maybe like one piece of advice to give to someone that is struggling with that, with, I don't know, leaning into their intuition or trusting themselves or, seeing what is right for them? Maybe those who are struggling with clarity or with doubt.
I can't, because I also struggle with that a lot. I feel like in many aspects of my life, intuition comes easy. When it comes to business, when it comes to career, intuition serves me really well. But in some other more personal aspects of my life, I get caught up as well between, and when we are a little bit unsure, intuition can sometimes feel like the devil's advocate, you know, and then conditioning and what we've been brought up to believe is the right thing to do may sound like the angel on the other side of our shoulders.
Yeah.
So I can't offer advice from the place of a person who always knows what to do, because I don't. And In fact, more often than not, I don't. Just that the big decisions, somehow I do. I would say, and this is really me speaking from my own embodied experience, something that my mentor, I'll talk about her because she's not my yoga mentor, but when I was moving through one of the most challenging dilemmas in my personal life, one day I went to her and I said, you know what? I don't know. I really don't know what's good for me. And she said, good. Now you can surrender to the divine. And that was my initiation into the divine. That was when she taught me how to build a small altar in my house. And I started to spend time sitting at the altar. But, you know, sometimes life has to bash you again and again and again that you fall onto your knees completely devoid of ego. You can't just say, I'm not going to be egoistic and then just throw your ego out the window. It doesn't work that way, you know? And I think I was so crushed at that time that when I sat at my altar, I was completely egoless in the sense that I had no agenda. I had zero agenda. And I think for anybody struggling with clarity or indecision, at some point, I think, spoiler alert, you might be there. And if you find yourself there, to maybe be okay to not know. And whatever form a higher power presents itself to you, for me it was the divine and the goddesses, but it might not be for everybody. It might be a mentor, it might be a friend, it might be going to see a therapist or a counselor. Whatever that more wise power offers to you, receive that with as much humility as possible. And without needing to immediately take what they offer you to fashion it into a decision. Like, sit in the fire. Even if it means sitting in the fire for 5 years. Sit in the fire, I would say.
Yeah.
It's not very good advice, I'm sorry.
Well, I think it is.
I think it's a very practical
I think it is
advice.
a very practical advice, yeah.
And you need to have a lot of courage
Yeah.
to just face yourself and look yourself in the mirror for 5 years, for
Yeah.
example, and learn to love the good parts and the not so good parts about yourself.
Yeah.
I actually have something to add. I
Yes,
think
please.
maybe a little bit more like advice as opposed to, oh, you have to sit in the fire for 5 years. It would be wait. Wait for clarity and don't pressure yourself thinking like, oh, it's been 3 weeks. Why am I still not sure? It's been 3 months. Why am I still not sure? Like my recent perspective of life is that it's almost like Jenga blocks where sometimes in order to access information or decision or clarity about a certain part of our life, we need to be courageous to pull out the block and let a part of the tower crumble. But sometimes in order to receive, in order to have the karma or the dharma points to receive help or guidance from whoever it is meant to come from, we need to also slide in a block to fortify the foundation so the next block can be put upon. Does it make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So sometimes, you know, when we are faced with indecision, and I speak completely from personal experience, that thought can consume us. But sometimes doing what we need to do, showing up in life, doing whatever we are meant to serve or whatever, that can actually be the building blocks that prepare you to receive the next layer of information. Does it make sense? So don't be so crippled by indecision that you stop living.
Yeah.
Ah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
There we go.
It is. Thank you so much for sharing.
So you have been moving really fast, I would say, with your offerings, like retreats after retreats. And
Is
now,
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
It
think-
looks like, or it
yeah,
feels
for
like
us.
from the outside.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not really for you.
Yeah, and on top of that, you have most recently opened a shala.
Yeah.
Share with us about how did that even came about, the idea of having a shala, and how was the process for you from the creation, the ideation, to maybe the mess of, you know, getting everything organized while you were on a retreat, I believe, at that time?
I was in the training.
Oh, on
in
training?
Mumbai,
Yeah, something like that. And now 3 months after, was it 3 months already? 3-4 months.
We're into our 5th month, actually.
Wow, okay, yeah, so almost half a year of running the Shala.
I never wanted to own a Shala. And even now, as a Shala owner, I never want to own a Shala. Is that too honest?
That is a very interesting perspective.
I don't know. For example, many teacher friends of mine, after teaching at studios for a period of time, the next logical step, it's almost like if you've been dating for a long time, the next logical step is to talk about marriage. And for them, after teaching in a studio setting for a long time, the next step is to consider opening their own studio. I've never had that dream, so to speak, like being a Shala owner, maybe because I was managing teachers at home at some point. I know that running a studio is definitely not a glamorous job. Managing people, managing yoga teachers, definitely not a glamorous or fun job. But I would say maybe the seed was planted when a group of us were on retreat in India, in North India this time, in March. And I had left teaching in a studio since December 2021. So I was a little bit of a nomad. So if you wanted to practice with me, you would either come on retreats or one of the few pop-up offerings that I was doing last year. And they came to me and they said, "So Leigh, if we want to practice with you again, we must buy an air ticket, is it?" And I was like, So that gave me a little bit of food for thought. And by then, I had been running that was my 4th retreat since the world opened up in March 2022. So I thought, okay, maybe there is some wisdom in what they were seemingly jokingly saying. So that planted a seed. And a couple of months later, 3 people in the span of 3 days came up to me and they said, "Have you ever thought of opening a Shala? If you do, I would love to invest." I would never take somebody's money, not for a project like this. But getting 3 messages in a row, that has to be some divine message. So I started to think even more seriously about the seed that was planted in India. And I spoke to my friend, Stacy. And Stacy is a friend who has for many years asked me to do my own thing. And I said, "Do you know any space that might be suitable?" Because it was Stacy that I told, because Stacy is a fire starter. She literally lights a matchstick underneath your butt. The idea of a Shala actualized so quickly. Because if left to my own devices, right now, it would still be a seed. Because I think a really important part of me at this point in my life is my freedom. And the idea of owning a physical space sometimes still feels like I can't be fully free in a way.
Yeah.
But then again, we could get all philosophical and Prasad about it and be like, "Oh, freedom is a state of mind. It's not about where you are." Hey, Prasad, if you're listening, I'm talking about you. So it was never something that I intended, but it felt like something that I had to do with Stacy's help. And I think right from the start, I knew that it wasn't a financially driven decision. You can't really make money in yoga right now. I don't feel like yoga is in its golden days that it was some years ago, number one. Number 2, I don't want to open a big Shala, so I wouldn't have the economies of scale to make financial sense, so to speak. But it felt like something I needed to do for the community. Whether it was for them to, if they want to gather with friends they met on retreat and practice together. It just felt like living yoga needed a home base. So I just sort of went with it. One of those moments where, you know what, I'm just going to go. And I realized a little while later when the Shala was put in place that Meghalaya is the place I was looking for when I asked that teacher many years ago, "Hey, I think there's more to yoga than this. Is there anywhere I can go to find out and learn more?" So
you created that space that you were looking for.
Yeah. I created that space that I was looking for so many years ago. And judging from the people walking through our doors, many people are where I was those years ago. So whether it's to come to learn about meditation, you know, the series of 3 sessions that you guys taught, very classical Yoga Sutra driven meditation, or to come into the space and learn about Tibetan mantras, or I taught like Mahalakshmi Stotram chanting, or to do a natal chart reading, you know, it's not yoga. And I think I have clarified that Meghalaya is not a yoga shala. It is just a space where I hope the healing arts become more accessible and people can feel comfortable enough to explore. Yeah. And for as long as the space feels viable, I will keep it. But I never open the space for it to be a legacy. So the moment it doesn't feel like it's resonating with me or the community anymore, I have no qualms to shut it down.
Yeah.
Like it just feels like it's needed at this point in my life. And we talked about the Jenga blocks. I feel like for Stacey and I in our friendship, this was a dharmic Jenga block that we had to do because it supported us to then receive more from beyond as to the next steps of our individual lives.
Yeah. You mentioned that freedom is an important value for you. Do you still feel free with this new responsibility, owning your Meghalaya, your Shala, Meghalaya Shala? How do you feel?
A little less free, if I were completely honest. I think for quite a few years, even when I was teaching at a studio, I was teaching part-time. I wasn't teaching full-time. I gave up managing. My work was very much on a project basis. So I knew exactly and I had full control. Okay, at this point, we're going to do a retreat. I'm going to be busy leading up to it. I'll be busy during. But after that, I am completely free of professional responsibility. Or I'm going to be fully immersed in training for a couple of months. But after that, you know, I am completely free of professional responsibility. But when you have a brick and mortar business, you are never completely free from professional responsibility. And I think that's the part that I'm still learning to navigate because there's a lot of vata in my constitution and vatas don't have the best stamina, you know? So I'm a little bit more of I'll dash for it and then I'll rest for as long as I dashed. And then I'll make a dash again and then I'll rest. But what this requires from me is a lot more of like a slow burn, a lot more like kapha-like stamina, and I have very little kapha in my constitution. So there's nothing beautiful I can say about it. It's challenging, but challenges are necessary.
And you have the support. You have like the support system. When you need help, you will call out and they would come immediately, right?
Yeah, I'm very lucky, and I think, but also it's because I never look at Meghalaya as my shala. I look at it as the community shala. You know, like when you and Anna came to do the meditation series, I hope you felt like it was a space that you could hold, you know? It wasn't like in anybody's shadow or like the shadow of a lineage or the shadow of a person. A space that is as full of potential as Shakti. So I feel because of that and the nature of that, like I don't want ownership over Meghalaya. And I feel that's challenging as a business owner. But that's also what makes the business work. We're more collaborative in nature more than anything.
Yeah, you created a home for all your kids, for all your children.
Yeah.
That they can come back to.
Yeah.
And they can feel at home there. And anyone can feel at home over there. It's a very beautiful space.
I definitely hope so.
So we know that you wrote a book. And it's not a book that you can purchase. It's just a book that you wrote for yourself. Maybe you want to share with us a little bit about this creative process and how the idea came up. And if you would like to share an excerpt from the book, from Tapestry. we would be honored.
I've always wanted to be a writer, and growing up, I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. And even though I have pivoted seemingly career directions to be a yoga teacher, language is still very much woven into my offerings, whether it's writing marketing copy, whether it is trying to put into words what I want to teach in a classroom setting. I don't know why, but maybe in my late 20s, early 30s, I felt that I wanted to consolidate my love for writing into a project that was tangible, as opposed to it being a skill and something that I always had in me. But I never quite knew, to write a book, what is the storyline? Who's the protagonist? Where's the story going to be set in? But when we were on retreat, that was in 2019 winter in North India. Somehow in North India, all these seeds are birthed. It's same place. So we had a beautiful kula of us coming together. We were sitting talking about the next year. Nobody knew COVID was coming. But we're all saying, okay, what do we envision doing next year? And for me at that time, it felt aligned to say, I want to write a book. And everybody in the kula, they kept me accountable. Like every few months, they're like, how's your book going? I'm like, still trying to survive COVID. So it started as that, like an innocent desire. And when I finally put my intention down into writing the book, I realized that I was stuck because I was trying to create a new story. Trying to create a new character, decide on the setting, put together a storyline. But that wasn't what the book that wanted to be birthed was about. I already write a lot, and I write a lot when I travel, when I have a lot of head space and heart space to just be. And I realized that the book that was wanting to come through me is a tapestry of all those writings that I have written. So I organized it. I would say I rewrote some things, but mostly I organized it into 6 chapters on life, on love, on death, on on yoga, something like that. And I got a really good friend of mine from my publishing days, Pearl, to illustrate like the stories, the way I remember them, like the memory, like some memories are so precious. And she illustrated them when I shared those stories with her. And then because we are both from the magazine world, we put together the manuscript really quickly. She sent it even for like color checks, color proofing. She got a quote for me. If you want it to be this size, it's this much with this binding. If you want it to be matte, if you want it to be glossy, it's like that. I'm like, okay. But when it came to sort of like putting money down for it, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to. Because when I looked at the manuscript that I had in my hands, pretty much as good as pre-publishing, I would say, even with the cover and like the back cover, it felt like such precious memories to me. Memories that were really for me, that if I'm 70 and still lucky to be healthy and alive, something that I want to read and be like, wow, I did have quite an illustrious life. I did live according to my own rules. Yeah. And I think at that time also, I spoke about a moment of like big indecision in my personal life. I found clarity and I closed a chapter. And it felt that Tapestry, this book, was birthed as part of the closure of the chapter. So it's a lot more personal than I expected it to be, which is why, yeah, I'm not publishing it. I called it Tapestry, a collection of stories that shaped me. And I don't know actually, like, from where, like, would you like me to read about? I have stories from when I was in India for the first time. I have stories about meeting my soulmates. I have stories about yoga. Yeah.
I think whichever that you feel called today.
Yeah. Okay. We may
You
have
can
to
just follow your intuition.
follow my intuition. Yeah. Okay. we may have to take a little bit of a pause.
Yeah,
while
sure.
I was telling
Take your time.
Candice and Anna that I haven't looked at the book for a year.
Would you read it every year?
No,
No, not
really. I last looked at it maybe in January this year.
And does it invoke a different feeling whenever you read the same passage again?
Not always, but because this is really my memories on paper, it has a way of transporting me back, into that me that lived the memory.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll read something. It's in the chapter that I put under love, and it's really. I remember I was maybe 25. I had just gotten one of my first few paychecks. Not 25, no, can't be. 23 maybe. I just gotten one of my first few paychecks from my journalism job in publishing. And I left India as an exchange student, swearing that I would never go back to India. It challenged me so much, at that age. But at that time, when it came to thinking about going for my first holiday with the money that I had made, I somehow wanted to go to India. And I asked Cici along with me, but Cici has limited leave, so I ended up going first for a week. Ayurvedic retreat, now that I think about it. So I went to an Ayurvedic retreat, not really knowing what Ayurveda was about. Stayed at the Kerala backwaters for 5 days. Then I moved to the more touristy parts, like the beach areas of Kerala, where Cici joined me. And then from there, we traveled to Mumbai, where we met up with one of my very, very, very dear friends, Raghu. And that was the second time I was in Mumbai. I ended my exchange trip in Mumbai, thinking like Mumbai is a shithole. Sorry, no offense. But then in that retreat, when I was in the Ayurvedic retreat, I read Shantaram. I'm not sure if you have read it,
Yeah.
Gregory Roberts. And he wrote about Mumbai in such a way that I was compelled to give it a second chance. So we ended that trip, Cici and I, in Mumbai. And I fell in love with Mumbai. And it, until today, 14 years later, it's still one of my favorite cities in the world. And since I'm going to Mumbai on retreat, bringing a retreat group in a few weeks, maybe I will read it.
Perfect.
I don't think I actually said Mumbai, but it was the inspiration for this. So I called the little writing Love. And I quote from Shantaram. "This is not like any other place. This is India. Everyone who comes here falls in love. Most of us fall in love many times over. And the Indians, they love most of all. There is nothing strange about this. It happens often and easily for the Indians. That is how they manage to live together, 1 billion of them, in reasonable peace. They are not perfect, of course. They know how to fight and lie and cheat each other, all the things that all of us do. But more than any other people in the world, the Indians know how to love one another," wrote Gregory David Roberts. Very often while reading Shantaram, I found myself nodding in agreement and biting down on a bubbling burst of laughter. Where words sometimes failed me, he captured so eloquently the eccentric beauty of a country and her people. I wasn't sure what to expect on my return trip to India, but falling in love definitely was not on the agenda. Yet I did, many times over in fact, in a freewheeling way I never did or could 4 years ago. I might have been fascinated, flawed and infatuated, but I didn't know how to love India when I was 20. I loved her colours, but hated her squalor. I loved her fields, but hated her traffic. I loved her buzz, but hated her silence. And as an exchange student running away from a messy breakup, I'd thrown myself into trying to love her and my new life in limbo at that time, but I wasn't actually ready to love without condition and exchange. I arrived in India this time around braced for the onslaught. The mess, the sounds, the riot that I knew would unabashedly dance and welcome before my face. All of that did appear, but my heart was light and my jaws remained unclenched. The potholes, the jostling, the smog, the incessant honking, even the bizarre social order that sees crowds and traffic piling up to stare at a pile of fallen logs on the midnight road. What would normally frustrate washed over me in waves of familiar comfort, and the tides of acceptance came easy. And once I'd surrendered myself to her wills, once I stood in the middle of the jungle garden in front of my Caroline cottage without choking with fear that the mysterious stirrings in the grass were fanged snakes, it was just a breeze, I began to love the land, the pockets of serenity that exist in tandem with the day-to-day mayhem, the intriguing and often impenetrable culture, the people, their inherent loveliness, and their unquestioning communion with fate. A few days ago, I sat in a rickety auto, inexplicably happy to be sandwiched between two friends in Mumbai's humidity and unmoving traffic. When my surroundings erupted in a deafening symphony of impatient, pointless honking, my heart took the final tumble into a senseless love affair with a city I'd hated so much on my last visit. I loved, if nothing, but for the sheer absurdity of the moment Mumbai gifted me, and the realization of the infinite, contradicting possibilities that the jumbled metropolis could bring. The thing about love is that it is hardly ever straightforward or pretty. It's torrid, messy, and when it hits you right in the gut, utterly life-changing.
It's beautiful.
2 pages, but wow, a lot of words.
Yeah.
And we have a little illustration of the Mumbai auto that Poe did. Yeah.
That's beautiful and very hypnotizing to listen to you.
I know. How many writings do you have in this book?
I want to say 90.
90.
Mm.
Wow.
I want to say 90, but it could be 50. I have no idea. Yeah.
I was just thinking that if you could come back every year to read to us,
I could.
It
Once
would
a
take
year,
50 years to complete this book.
Yeah, once a year I would. Oh, shall I read one more? A really short one. It talks about my love for Hindi. I'm a Hindi student for a long time. Not a great one, but a very passionate and enthusiastic one. And it's really just a short poem. It's called Mother Tongue. And I remember what sparked it. I was on my way home from Bollywood dance class some years ago, and I walked past a group of young Indian girls, and they were talking in Hindi, and I felt this inexplicable longing, but also envy. There was something so beautiful about their language that I wanted to be a part of, yet I couldn't really understand at that time, and that was what sparked me to come back to Hindi lessons. Shall I?
Yeah.
Mother tongue. The evening breeze carries along the echo of a distant tongue. My heart stirs, aroused by the lilts and the nuances. My soul burns, heavy with inexplicable longing. How can something so unfamiliar feel like home?
Beautiful.
This
Thank
might be
you.
my favorite, I think, in the book.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing it, given that it's such a personal.
Thank you for having the space for me to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved it. You know what? I'm going to read it on my way out of this place.
I thought you were going to say that you changed your mind and you're going to publish it.
Nah. I don't know. I don't feel
Who knows? Maybe it will come.
Maybe, but unlikely. It's not aligning, I think.
What is the relationship between you and words? Words held you or supported you or allowed you to have this creative expression? Yeah, how is that relationship like with language and words?
I think words were gifted to me by my father. He's an extremely eloquent man, and he always boasts, to which I would disagree in front of him, but secretly agree, that when he was younger, people would ask him, why are you not a DJ? Because you have the voice for it. And I also remember something that Octavio shared in one of his sessions. How do you know that your practice is on track? I think as practitioners, we may ask ourselves that. And he had an answer that really resonated with me, which is, if your practice is on track, you would find yourself more and more creative, more and more able to tap into the creative process. And I think for me, words are my outlet as well as my entry into that creative process. Like, people create in many ways. They draw, they make pottery, blah, blah, blah. For me, it's always words, and they offer me a way to tangibilize emotions or feelings or sensations, but they also offer me a bridge to my community. And I like to think that when I write a lot, but I don't always publish it on public platforms. I like to think that when I feel called to share something on a public platform, it is because there's somebody out there who maybe needed those words to help them contain or shape or process whatever they are feeling or trying to make sense of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that for me, like, whether it's teaching or living or just reflecting, words are my medium.
And definitely you can feel that listening to what you wrote.
Yeah, I think the way that you were and are able to weave words into some kind of a feeling and emotion that really touched people. And like sometimes you would say in a yoga practice that you don't even know what you were saying earlier, but it really hits us and there's a deep impression. And I think that is also the gift that through the divine worked through you, and then that energy was also received from the practitioner as well, from the students.
I hope so.
All right, shall we wrap up?
Yeah.
It is a long interview, and I think we can go on and on.
we could definitely continue, but it's time to wrap up and time to ask our one last final question. So I believe this is a question that we will want to ask every person that comes to Heart Space podcast. If you can share with us, what is a heart-centered life for you?
I saw that question in your list. I'm like, oh, big question. I didn't think about it. What does it mean to live a heart-centered life? I feel like I'm living one. So if I were to take that into the context, to live a heart-centered life is to lean courageously into intuition, to be humble enough to receive messages, clues, and guidance. And when the calling comes through your soul, to unabashedly answer that call without abandon.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
And are you planning for any more retreats or any offerings in Meghalaya that our listeners should know about?
So while I'm not sure where my inner alignment is going to be in terms of when we close the chapter of Meghalaya, there is a definite closure that would come in March 2025 because the government is taking back Pearl's Hill for redevelopment. So all tenants would be asked to move out. But whether in a heart-centered way, I will feel called to keep Meghalaya open till then, I feel I don't want to make any promises. But for at least the next year, I think we'll definitely be around in 2024. It's going to be a space where more and more of my friends and friends of friends will be coming at some point to share their offerings. And more, Meghalaya, I foresee it to be a place where it is by the community, for the community. So we have more public yoga sessions coming up starting in Jan. We have Navakarana Vinyasa. We have a prenatal couples yoga workshop. None of it by me. And one of my lovely, lovely friends, Aki, like heart-centered friendship. She became a mother in the past 1.5 years. She became really passionate about some topics revolving around motherhood. And we're going to have her come in to lead a once a month mummy circle. So off the top of my head, I'm going to lead a teacher training in March to May, and that will likely be my last 200-hour teacher training indefinitely, because I feel like, for me, I just want to take a step back and just review. This would be batch 7, so 7 reiterations of a training. I think it's a auspicious number to pause. Yeah. And then we're going on retreat to Japan, which I was late for this podcast because I was caught up in a little bit of admin work. 1st to 7th of June in Wakayama with my friend Yukari. So we'll be co-hosting. Yukari is a teacher based in Japan. We both trained with Emily, so we're very similar in terms of our inclinations, I would say. But she's also a certified hiking guide. Like, there's such a thing in Japan. So it's going to be a retreat that's immersed in nature, but also Japanese culture. And I have a lot of plans in my head, but as we're always speaking, like we were saying in the podcast, I think they will actualize if it aligns.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming, for sharing, for being open and so generous with everything that you shared with us. It was wonderful having you here.
Yeah, and I feel like there are a lot of pockets of sharings that I would go back and listen to again, because some moments I had a visceral reaction to it.
Yeah.
And I wish that I could explain a bit more of that reaction, but we'll do that another time. But thank you for being so open and saying yes without even hesitating when we asked, and for sharing your life, and for just doing this work, this dharma, this dharmic journey.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work. Like, it's not easy to record a podcast. I definitely know it. So thank you for doing this for the community, which I'm sure is what your greatest intention is.
Thank you.
Thank you.